Okay, is everybody ready? A little over a year ago, we gathered in this room to announce a new panel on youth bullying that I tasked to create safer, harassment-free school environments. The impetus for the task force was a letter that I received from two officials whose agencies deal with youth safety. Secretary Audrey Tays Haynes, who leads the State Cabinet for Health and Family Services, and Dr. Terry Holliday, who was then Kentucky's Commissioner of Education. In short, the letter was a reminder that bullying was a serious problem in Kentucky that demanded a more aggressive response from everybody. The numbers were sobering. 1 in 4 Kentucky students ages 12 to 18 reported being bullied at school in 2011. And schools recorded over 15,000 incidents of bullying in Kentucky during the 2012-2013 school year. Behind each of those numbers is a heartbreaking story. And if you want to hear one such story, you're going to hear from Morgan Guess, a young member of this 26-member task force who is joining us here today. The panel spent a year hearing from experts and discussing potential strategies to help Kentucky schools both respond to youth bullying and, more importantly, how to prevent it. Today, the panel delivers to me a 29-page report that they just adopted this morning with new recommendations for schools, public agencies, and communities. Secretary Haynes is going to go into more detail on the recommendations and the work of the task force, but in general, they involve 4 areas. 1, adopting a statewide formal definition of bullying. 2, adopting standards within all school districts to promote a positive, safe climate and culture. 3, investing in behavioral health counselors at the local school level. And 4, establishing a state-level agency or office that coordinates community-driven efforts to promote bullying prevention. What you will find in reading the report is that bullying is a complex problem that requires a variety of responses on a number of levels. There is no single solution. What's also apparent is that this just isn't a school problem. It's a societal problem. And we all need to get involved right now in preventing it. Today isn't the end of this work. It is the end of the very first step. And there are many more steps to take. I urge our state lawmakers to work with the next governor to implement these recommendations and to focus the state's energy and resources on getting serious about stamping out bullying. And I urge leaders around this state, including educators, public health officials, civic leaders, community organizations, religious leaders, business officials, in short, everyone, to keep this on the front burner of issues that need to be addressed. We can't pat ourselves on the back and toss this report in the corner to gather dust. We have a moral obligation to ensure the physical, psychological, and emotional health of our children, and to create an environment that is free of intimidation and harassment. But it's not only a moral obligation, it's also an economic imperative. Children who are bullied at school don't learn. They don't reach their potential. That hurts our workforce, and long-term it hurts our state by robbing it of our most precious resource, our people and their intellectual capital. It's time for action, serious action, and these recommendations are a great place to start. I want to thank Secretary Haynes and Dr. Terry Holliday, who co-chaired the task force, and I want to thank each one of its members, most of whom are up here with me today. This was a time-consuming job, and I'm sure it was an emotionally difficult job at the same time. Their dedication is appreciated. Finally, as part of today's announcement and to draw attention to the task force work, I've proclaimed this week as Safe School Weeks in Kentucky. Just turn on the news these days, folks, and you will hear horrific stories that remind us that safety at school is an issue that can't be taken for granted. I've signed a proclamation that spells out that urgency in Safe Schools Week. Along with this report on bullying, it provides a framework for ongoing action, and we must act. Now I'd like to call on Secretary Haynes.
Thanks, Governor. Well, thank you all so much, Governor. Really, thank you so much for appointing me as a co-chair with Commissioner Holliday to be part of this team. I cannot tell you what a dedicated group of individuals that committed themselves to the discussion and to these recommendations. Really, it has been eye-opening for me to get a better idea of the depth and breadth and listen from to so many experts that we brought in from both across Kentucky as well as throughout this country to address this group. Since you appointed us late last summer, our 26-member group, we met 6 times in full sessions, and several times the subcommittee met separately and in addition. It's important that I really recognize Dr. Holliday. We had really, I must say, hoped to get this report done before Dr. Holliday's last day at the Kentucky Department of Education. He cared very deeply about it, but it wasn't in the cards. There was still too much work to be done in August and September to finish up the report, and he understood that, and he said it's better to get it right than to rush it. So he was very engaged in this process with me. So he was very dedicated and engaged and made a lot of important contributions. Over the last year, as the governor said, we heard from dozens of engaged voices. We heard from educators, from medical experts, parents, of course, students, as well as business leaders. We learned that the problem of bullying is severe. It can hinder and hurt both youth and families, schools and communities. It can stifle emotional development, and it can break hearts. We learned that there is really no one magic solution to bullying, and we learned that we must approach it systematically as a community-wide public health issue. And by doing so, we can make a significant as well as a sustained impact. This is not a one-size-fits-all, only a media campaign, only this, only that will take care of this. I am certainly no scientist, but I do spend a lot of time with the Department of Public Health staff. I do pay attention when they talk about how the state would react to a crisis like a pandemic flu, or like we reacted to Ebola or other infectious diseases. I know a little bit about the public health approach. It's comprehensive. Through this method of public health approach, the committee has recommended that some very specific steps to investigate bullying and to better understand it be followed. So first, define and monitor the problem, identify risk and protective factors, develop and test prevention strategies, and do what we can to ensure widespread adoption. To see the greatest results, our work must be comprehensive and it must be deliberate. We can reach not just individuals, but Kentucky's entire population. We can stop more incidents of bullying. But this is going to mean that all of us, teachers, social workers, parents, neighbors, our legislative leaders, community leaders, we all must get involved. We need to start talking about prevention. It is such a key word in our task force. It's a word that continued to run through our deliberations. The communication, intervention, appropriate behavioral health screening, all of this is important for us to begin to see improvement. Our youth deserve to be safe in their schools and feel comfortable also in their communities, as well as certainly we want them to feel free to express themselves. Being young today is not what it was certainly when most of us standing in this room were in school. I probably was bullied in school, but maybe I didn't even know. I just thought someone was being insulting. But it's the repetition, and also it is really for a young person who doesn't feel as though there's a way out in the constant intimidation. I'm sure Morgan will shine a light on that. We need to know how difficult it is for so many of these young people, especially, of course, with social media. It's a lot more challenging for them to grow up successfully now than maybe for some of us. But there are more bright spots for our young people today and opportunities, certainly, than dark moments. Bullying does not have to be what defines the early years of Kentucky's youth. To the young people listening and those of any age who need this message, there is one important thing to say on this issue, and that is none of us, regardless of our age, should ever let anyone's ignorance, their hate, their drama or negativity stop any of us from being the best person we can be. Beyond this task force, beyond the walls of our schools, we as the Commonwealth of citizens can stand strong together and stop the pervasiveness of bullying and help more kids and young people grow and thrive successfully. And Governor, I know I do speak for this task force when I really want to seriously express our thanks to you for your leadership. Really. So with that, I want to call on one of our very committed members, and even though she is the youngest member, she was no doubt the wisest. So Morgan Guess, who she is not in high school, she is a 7th grader from Paducah. So Morgan, would you please join me?
It has been an honor for me to serve on this task force. I am grateful to Governor Beshear for allowing me the opportunity to represent Kentucky students. The last year has shown me that there are citizens all across Kentucky who are committed to changing the culture of bullying. I have great hope for Kentucky's future. I also learned that this issue is complex. We have more than a dozen laws in place to protect students. And while they are important, I believe the real change comes from every Kentuckian every day being committed to building a better climate in our schools, in our homes, and across our communities. Kentuckians must continue to take this issue seriously. We must not only report bullying incidents, but we must also stand up when we see someone being bullied. We must create cultures that focus on empathy, on valuing diversity, on being kind, and on building leadership skills. This is a start. This is an important start. This task force has provided a definition that can be used all across the Commonwealth and identified that bullying is truly a public health issue. My hope is that we will commit the mental health resources that are needed for our students. I also ask that schools welcome parents who should be present when a student is being asked by administrators. I think back to my own bullying experience. I was only 8. I was afraid, and I cannot imagine my parents not being in the room while I was being questioned. I believe Kentucky schools who take this position discourage students from reporting incidents and already puts fragile children at risk. We have more to do. I'm committed to doing my part. I'm counting on your commitment as well. All Kentucky students are. I will forever be a better person because of my time spent with the members on the task force.
Any questions?
Talk about why it's important, first of all, to identify and define what bullying is. Why is that so important?
Won't you step up and give them the details?
Well, I think that the definition, we were well into about meeting 3 before we decided on a particular definition, which is very much patterned. It's on page 4 of the report, by the way, and is very much patterned after the federal definition, which was put together by the CDC and the Department of Education and Health and Human Services. And so I think the broad, it's unwanted, it's verbal, physical, or social behavior. That's broad. Among school-aged children that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. The behavior is repeated. It has the potential to be repeated over time and can happen anywhere. And I believe that we wanted to do that to give both parents, community leaders, and schools an opportunity to put their own policies and programs in place to begin to deal with this early instead of waiting until kids are in so much distress that they try suicide, or actually we know commit suicide, and have found out that later that they've been involved in a lot of bullying by 1 or 2 students. We heard terrible, disgusting stories from family members, parents, administrators, and community leaders as we went through these 6 meetings. And really, I think by having a definition that is broad and shows repeated abuse, it does begin to allow folks to get on the same page as we're implementing programs.
What kind of cost are we talking about here? And where's it going to come from?
It's going to come from the state budget, of course. We don't want to really throw out, this morning we were making some estimates. There's been one of the recommendations as an office, but there's a bipartisan group of legislators here who I will tell you, they were at all the meetings. They traveled when we traveled. They put this as a priority. And so they have asked my staff and Kentucky Department of Education staff to work with LRC. We will be doing that very quickly to put a fiscal impact analysis on this, as well as to look at the pieces of this that can be put in legislative language. So this is not expensive, considering how do you put a price on the anguish that kids are feeling. I'm sure that Morgan, there's not a price on the bullying that she went through. So it's a small price to pay to help community leaders, educators, and parents really better learn how to deal with it and to help folks put policies in place. Also, possibly to even investigate someone who seems to be a repeated, regardless of which school system they're in. We heard one story about a young person who had been moved to 3 or 4 different schools and continued to bully others. And so we have police represented, business leaders on our group. So I think it will be a very small investment for a huge payoff at the end of the day.
With the change in administration, how do you keep this from falling through the cracks?
Behind me are some very committed people. And I would venture to say they're not going to let it fall through the cracks. This is an extremely serious problem, and I think we all know that. We all acknowledge it. The key to addressing this is to make sure we keep it on the front burner. there will be a transition to the next governor and the next administration. And in that transition, this issue will be right at the top of the list of things that we point out to the incoming administration that should be grabbed hold of and should be addressed as quickly as possible. And as I mentioned, these people standing behind me have invested almost a year of their lives in this effort, and they're determined, and I'm determined for as much as I can do as an outgoing governor to make sure that this stays on the front burner and that the next administration addresses it and the next legislative session addresses it. Okay, thank you all very much.
Governor, the group would like to have a picture.
We would love to
And
do that.
So if we could do that. Actually, is everybody okay doing it here?
Sure.
All right, great. That way I know the governor has a schedule, so he might not be able to go out on the steps with us.